All right, so now that you've kind of learned how we use the platform and our behavior management system, we're going to move on to some best practices. At the beginning of the school year, I actually kind of called an expert panel of teachers that I'd worked with to ask them to tell me what's worked really well for them. So this is kind of a collective list of best practices. The best advice I can give you with Collaborate is to plan ahead and don't be afraid to try something. When I first started teaching, and at the time it was Illuminate, we would have a million slides because I would think to myself, I really want to try this. I want to see if it works, but I've got to have something in case that it doesn't to make it worth my parents' time, my students' time, because you've got to have that buy-in. If they're coming to your lessons week after week and they're not very informative, they're not well planned, and they're not very educational, you're going to lose your participation. So the biggest piece is to really think about making it worth your time to do and their time to come. So, I'm always okay with experimentation. I think that's how I got to a lot of the things that I can do now and getting that confidence level, but I always had a backup plan as well. And then the best part of that is, say you create this entire backup plan and you don't need it, well, you can use that same presentation later for review or with a small group or teach it the next day's lesson. So it's not really time wasted. The thing that I love about Blackboard Collaborate is I can really see and create the lesson kind of like you did in college, where you started with the motivation and you shared the objective, and then you modeled and guided practice, and then the students took the assessment on their own. You can literally make sure that you do not skip any step of the lesson planning process because you're going to make a slide for each one to remind you to tackle that piece. So, some of the best practices for Collaborate that I have found is that the person doing is the person learning. So, make sure you're giving your students privileges. I know it's really overwhelming to give up that control, especially the first time you do it and you've got 70 kindergartners in a session and they're all circling on the page. But then over time you learn, okay, I can clear the page and then we have a fresh sheet and all the students get to participate. Because if you are giving this lesson lecture style, especially to early childhood, they're going to get bored. We've all sat through webinars and meetings where we weren't highly engaged, and we're adults. I mean, we've had 20 years of experience being students. So these younger students need to be interactive. They need to I'm not a big fan of, making education fun for the sake of making it fun. Their job at school is to learn, but they need to be engaging. I think that's the key piece. And think of making lessons mirror your face to face lessons. Like I said before, it's really easy to see that lesson planning progress or process roll out in front of you. You can literally create a slide for each one of those. But you can also start your morning meetings. We do the pledge for our reading block because that's our first big meeting of the day. And we have morning message and calendar time. For my math sessions, I always have a warm up where we practice counting, we sing songs. Yes, I sing to them, and I'm not musical at all, but I will do it. That took me about 3 years to get brave enough to do, I will be honest. And then you can also use a variety of checks for understanding. Make sure that when you're presenting new information, you stop. And sometimes you can just do something as simple as give me a smiley face if you understand, a frown face if you want me to explain it again. And no, not all students are going to admit they need it explained again, but at least you see that they're there, they're answering your questions, and if at least one kid gives a frown face, then you have an excuse to, okay, and that definition one more time is. So, it really can look like lessons do in the classroom, but you've really got to be brave and you've got to be creative with it. Always make sure you state your objective. So, I like to tell my students I like to use I can statements. So the lesson I'm teaching today, I'll tell the students, by the end of the day, you will be able to say, I can make connections from text to self by reading about Alexander's horrible, terrible, no good, very bad day. For a math lesson, I might say, by the end of today, you will be able to add 1 to a number and find the answer. So, take time to make that slide so you don't forget it. And remember to keep the lesson moving forward. One of the main ways that I learned and tried to train myself for collaborates is I had a hard time watching myself. I think it's kind of typical. People don't like to hear their own voice. So it was hard for me to go back and watch my lessons. I eventually got brave enough to do that, but I would like to watch other teachers' lessons. And sometimes they would sit for a very long time on one problem and give students, about 15 students, one at a time, chance to answer. And there was a lot of downtime because you're waiting for them to turn on their mics, you're waiting for them to respond to you. And I think that is great from time to time because you really want to get to know your students. But that can't be the sole way that you do it. Sometimes I just like to go to my mic privileges and give 2 people as maximum talkers and just turn it on and say, tell me the answer, turn your mic off when you're finished. Because then you're going to always have students that are ready to answer. They're going to be paying attention because they want to be the first one to get their mic on. They want to get a chance to talk that day. And then you can vary the time and make sure the lesson's moving forward. If it's taking them forever to answer, okay, Susie got this, we're going to move on. If they really seem to be getting it, then give, 15 kids a chance to answer. It takes about 15 seconds. So if you let multiple talkers and just turn on the privileges to everyone, you can help keep the lesson moving forward and keep them engaged because they want the chance to get their turn. And to do that, they've got to be quick. So here are some ways that I like to encourage student interaction in my sessions. I like to ask them to raise their hands. We do breakout rooms individual. We do whole group assignments. The polling question is huge. Multiple choice questions, yes or no. That might even be yesterday just to get their engagement and get their attention. Give me a green check if it snowed at your house yesterday, red X if it didn't. Because like I said, I have students all across the state too. And then I also like to push them to websites or games. So, my biggest goal with my whole group lessons is to make sure everyone can participate. I don't want the students to come and only 5 kids got to answer the question. I don't think that's beneficial for their time. So, one way that I might participate is I ask the students to raise their hands. In my next video, you'll see an example of that in Blackboard Collaborate. So when they raise their hands, they get a number. So then I can say, draw something that starts with the letter A in your box. So number 1 would draw their picture here and on down the line. Or I could give them a math problem, 5 plus 3. Write your answer in the box. So that's a great way for everyone to, it's a quick check for understanding for everyone to answer their question. So this is going to be the end of part 3 of today's presentation because I'm actually going to send you to this page to see other examples of student participation, and these are live videos that I have kind of cut up from my sessions. So do forgive me because I am not a editing expert, so the cut up is not so smooth, but it gets the point across to show you ways that students can interact. And in some of these, it's 2 sessions. I think it is a smaller group session, which is 35. That's not a small group, I know that. But it's not our entire grade level. And then there's a reading block, and that usually varies from 70 to 90 students a day. So I'm going to send you to that video.